our education was previously based on external threats. And therefore, how is it going to change? How is this extant professional security education, how will it change because of the way we view this survival interest? This is what I want to do. So we will see how we can reform our education to be able to look at these threats. And I'll also give, finally, an example of what we have done in Kenya. I believe when you're coming in, you are given this matrix that shows the kind of reforms that we are doing in Kenya. But first, we begin with a quote from Sun Tzu. Slide, please. When I was in China, it was mandatory we go through the 13 chapters of the art of war. They based their studies on the art of war. And I specifically looked at chapter 5, depth. But Sun Tzu says that because of how security, the change war with security, because of how vital it is, security must be thoroughly studied. It must be thoroughly studied because it deals with the survival of the nation. It deals with the survival of the nation. That's why we must thoroughly and critically look at it. The beginning point is to define it. So first of all, conceptualize security. I know you have done this, but it is important that we do this before we proceed with the education, by the reforming professional education. Next slide. Freedoms are what is critical. I didn't want to pronounce this word because I'm not sure whether it is securus or securus. People who have studied Latin and Greek would be able to define it. But it is the state of, securus is the state of being free from dangers, or security for that matter, because it is derived from this word, from dangers. Free, the freedom from dangers. I would argue that the main difference when you come to human security, the main difference between a human being and an animal, any animal, is the ability of a human being to think, the ability to generate ideas. The ability of a human being to generate ideas and to think is a right. And it is the greatest right in my mind. What makes a human being a human is because we can think and make decisions. We can generate ideas and make decisions that will move us forward. It is the gray matter. The gray matter in us is what makes the difference. And our gray matter is the same. I don't know how many ounces a gray matter is, but my gray matter, your gray matter, the gray matter of Helen, of Ambassador Bellamy, of whoever, it is the same. If you removed my gray matter now and put it here, and you removed the gray matter of a person in Brazil, in Russia, and you put it here, and you ask a person who had just walked in, which is the gray matter of Mwaniki, or another general from Brazil, or another general, they will not make a difference. They will not say, this belongs to Mwaniki, this belongs to who? No, it's the same. It's the way we were wired by God, the way we were created. And nobody has got a monopoly of idea. Nobody. Everybody has got the ability to contribute an idea. And it is their right to. They are free to do that. They are free to generate ideas and contribute ideas. And therefore, to me, the greatest right, the first security, what must be secured and protected, what must be protected first, is the ability of human beings to think. The right to make choices, the right to make decisions, the right to think, to generate ideas. That is very critical. You see, because once you secure that, then you can move to the rest of the body. So the right to eat, the right to food, or the need to have food becomes critical, because without eating, they cannot think. So food security in terms of prioritization becomes, to me, number 2. Because if they think, if they eat, then you can think about the rest of the body. Then you talk of health security. I was looking at the word freedom, and it was saying freedom is expressed in the process of broadening the scope and options given to the individual so that he or she can truly develop their potential. I repeat, freedom is expressed in the process of broadening the scope and options given to the individual so that he or she can truly develop that potential. To me, that is equity. Equity, the ability to have access to equal opportunities. So therefore, protection of human rights is the core of security. Is the core of security. This definition of human rights, very, very interesting. This definition of human rights was not constructed by the United Nations Security Council. No, it was constructed by the United Nations Development Program back in 1994. And then they formed this Commission for Human Security. And so they have revised this definition for some time, in 2002, in 2003, in 2004, and 2005. So the argument then is, once you have looked at the human being, once you have looked at the individual, then you can talk of other securities that I saw you covered on Monday: energy security, environmental security. All these other securities follow human security. These others are critical because the state, when you look at political security, it becomes critical. Political security becomes very critical because the state is the most important, effective provider of security. As the scholars tell us, I think this is Buzan who tells us this. So therefore, in this presentation, I would argue that we look at security from a dual concept, from the eyes of the state and that of the people. Because we have been looking at security and we have been hedging our professional education from the lenses of the state. And my argument is that we start looking at professional security education from the eyes of human security, of the individual, of the person. Therefore, let me look at professional security education, what we are doing currently, from the eyes of the state. Next slide, please. If you look at your session 2, you looked at the core security sectors. You looked at the core security sectors. You looked at the police, you looked at intelligence, you looked at judiciary, you looked at prisons, defense, governance, legislature, and so forth. Okay, there's an area that you looked at, the militias, in terms of non-state actors. I'm not exactly sure about why militias would be part of security, but I also understand the definition of militia. That can be a bit, you can discuss that in your, I'm sure you must have discussed that in your seminars. But suffice to say that in all those core security sectors, they have their basic training. I'm using military terms, tactical. They have their basic training. And the basic training is really hedged towards converting one from whatever it is to the discipline, that whether if it is a lawyer, they will go through the legal courses and so forth. I would argue that as Colonel Dempsey was saying here this morning, most states are quite good at the tactical level and at the operation level. There's critical mass in terms of training. Tanzania Military Academy, Monduli, one of the best academies. If you want to think of the Senegalese Academy, one of the best. In our academy now, we are giving a Bachelor of Science, a bachelor's in military sciences. They have got to go for 4 years. So you are converting them from civilians to soldiers. You're making sure that they are marksmen, you know. They're training in terms of the probability to kill is first class. You are emphasizing in the issues of character, because character development is key. In this level, discipline is the hallmark. It is the main thing. We normally say a fish lives in water. Military lives in discipline. If you remove discipline from the military, then that military force is dead. So there's critical mass. There's a critical mass in here and here, but where we have a problem is at the strategic level, and this is critical. This is critical because the construction of policy and the process of security strategy is done at this level. Strategic culture is developed at this level. The values in terms of strategic thought and the value and culturalization is that to encourage a people is done at this level, and therefore it is important, very, very important, because this is where you train leaders. This is where you train strategic leaders. You know, one of the men that I respect most is Prime Minister Churchill. The British Prime Minister Churchill, he did a great job during the Second World War. He said that the role of strategy is to see the future. That is the role of strategy, to see the future. And more importantly, to put in place the mechanisms and structures that will open that future. That is the role of strategy. So you need critical mass in leaders that understand how not only to construct vision, but out of that vision to create strategies that will make us, that will allow us arrive in those visions that our forefathers, Kenyatta, Nkrumah, Nyerere, had. This level is critical, and as you know, in training, you train people. You give them tools that they will be able to use. 15 years. You are at the training at this level. You're training people's people at the level of deputy directors, colonels, senior assistant commissioners of police, and so forth, deputy assistant secretaries. These are the people that you're training at that time. It takes them about 10 years. It will take a colonel about not less than 15 years to make it to a general. But you're giving him those tools at that time. But what is critical, it is because at this level, you integrate training. You bring, I'll not use the word joint, because joint is more military, but you bring more of security sector participants together, so that they grow together and they understand these things. For example, in our National Defense College, we have got only 7 military officers from Kenya. The rest of the military officers are from East Africa. And I'm happy I can see we have alumni. Alumni, you say there's alumni from here. So during question time, don't ask me. Ask the general here on the right from Uganda. He's from our college. And then the rest of the participants are civilians. They are from the judiciary. Age council. They are from they are councillors from judiciary. I have just finished doing a presentation to the permanent secretaries, and I insisted that I need 2 guys from the Ministry of Agriculture, one on food security, and the other one from water. You know, imagine our people don't take water to be part of food. I mean, even before you eat, you must take a glass of water. Huh? So how can you cluster? How can you say there is a minister for water development and a minister for food development? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So I have insisted that food is the main thing. So we need more guys from this place. Therefore, training, the critical training is at this level. I'm so happy. Last month we were there opening the Tanzanian National Defense College. Next year we'll go to Uganda, open Uganda's National Defense College. Then after that, God willing, Rwanda, Burundi. And if before I die, I can see Somali National Defense College, voila. Then the problems of East Africa are solved. The problems of East Africa are solved. Now, because this is what we have been doing, how do we then advance our professional security education to look at the future? How do we do that? I believe that the beginning point of this is to do a strategic security review. And a strategic security review will determine the kind of education or training that a country will undertake. Now, I'll go back to Sun Tzu to be able to go to the future. Slide, please. Sun Tzu says that any education, any war, because the issue is this review. He says that the first thing is if you know yourself and you know the enemy, then you have won the battle. Yeah. But if you are ignorant of both you yourself and the enemy, then there is a very big problem. So what kind of war, what kind of education do we ourselves? Who is the enemy, and who are we? General Rupert Smith, he is the one who led the British forces in the Gulf War. Says that the way we are he has written a book on the utility of force. He's calling it War Among the People. I would advise that those of you who are interested in new wars, don't read Mary Caldo alone, but also read General Rupert Smith. He says that future wars, he was writing then, but whatever he said is here with us, and it will remain with us. He says that future wars will be wars among the people. The industrial warfare, nuclear war where you have seen tanks against tanks, jet fighters, and that kind of thing. That is gone. That is gone, and it will not come back. And you know it better than me. You have got people now in Nigeria, when people are praying, they destroy others. In Kenya, the same thing. In Kenya, we never thought that would go across the borders and fight. But the biggest fight we have is real operations. What our boys are doing in Somalia is nothing. The biggest problem we have is securing our cities. Because this is where the war, there's no fever. You don't know who is the enemy. You don't know who is the enemy. There's no forward edge of battle area. This is the nature. This is the nature of war today. You see, the objectives, Rupert Smith argues that the objectives of war, just as Clausewitz said, that, you see, the end state in war is peace. People go to war, that is the irony. To do what? To have peace. The objectives, that has not changed. Peace, security, peace, freedom, that has not changed. But the nature, that has changed. Because the means, that have changed. That has changed. During Sun Tzu, they were using bows and arrows. General Smith was using aircrafts and tanks and all that kind of thing. That has changed. It's not about kinetic energy, as we'll see, as I'm going to show just now. It is more about development. It's more about development. The beginning of any war, as Sun Tzu has said, is first of all know the enemy. So who is the enemy? What are the threats? Next slide. I'm sure you have looked at these threats. I'll only point one here. Poverty. Poverty in the Commission for Human Security say that poverty is conceptualized as a human security threat, not because it can induce violence which threatens stability of the state. Because if people are poor, they will go and look for food, they will steal, they will do all these things. But because it is a threat to the dignity of the individual. You know, that is very deep. That is why it is the main threat. It removes humanity. It removes anything that is human. Then he says hunger. The other major threat is hunger. I was looking at the Africa Human Development report, and it shows that about 41.2% within our region, the Greater Horn of Africa, hunger is the main cause of underdevelopment. It is the main cause of the conflicts that we have. Hunger. Last month, I was in Brazil. During term 3 of our college, we look at the global security environment. And when we divide the international relations of the world into the Americas, Africa, Europe, Middle East, which is the other one? Asia, and Asia. You know, very interesting. Our officers, when they're looking at Americas, if you talk, sometimes I find them discussing about Chile in my mind, but they're talking about Canada. Just the same way American officers here, they would discuss about Senegal, and yet they're talking about Botswana. You know what I mean? Botswana is 9 hours by aircraft from Senegal. They speak different languages. So we look at the Americas, and therefore, when we were looking at the Americas, we said, let us go to Brazil. Why? Because for the last 15 years, Brazil has moved from the problems that we have, and it is moving to a developed country. So we wanted to say they had petrol, yes, they had the forest, they had minerals, they had everything, but they were underdeveloped. They had all these problems. What is it that they did? to be where they are. Do you know, we spent 1 week in Manaus. Manaus is the center of Amazon. They have a Ministry of Social Development and fight against hunger. They have got it right. They have got it what? Right. They identified the center of gravity for development. You know, you take care of the stomach and the head works. And the head does what? Works. That is what President Lula did. He said every Brazilian, because of dignity, they must have 2 meals, a minimum of 2 meals per day. And because of that, they knew how to create food. People had said that the soil around Brasilia is useless. They started growing soya. So because they had freed people, you know, the military had sat on them. They had freed people's minds. They were able to go and get the soil and analyze what is it that they can grow. And you know, they have got huge land. So they started growing soya. They started growing what? Soya. Now they are exporting soya in tons and they were able to feed their people. Nowhere. We went to a farm, 200,000 hectares of rice. Can you imagine? 200,000 hectares of rice. Brazil is going far. I'm not talking about Brazil, but this is the fight. This is the fight that we are growing. Next threat. Next slide, please. I don't want to talk about cattle rustling because my friend Colonel Dempsey had talked about cattle rustling. But because I'm just about to get something from my daughter, I will not talk about cattle rustling. Next slide, please. But I'll look quickly, because of time, at the weaknesses. Because we have looked at those threats, then it is critical that we look at our weaknesses. We know ourselves. I think our major weakness is bad governance. There's a question that was asked in the morning on this issue of bad governance. And if I remember, the way to overcome this is to have a constitution that is led by the people, because it holds the leaders accountable, responsible. If you go through, I would argue that if you go through the reforms that are in Kenya, the beginning of those reforms is the constitution, and it is the constitution that people decided on. Judicially, the Chief Justice, the Supreme judges and everybody, they were interviewed on camera, they were interviewed open on television. All Kenyans. We spent 4 days seeing the kind of judges we'll have. All judges that were the suspicion, they took off. The constitution is critical because it gives power to the legislature, and it tells the legislatures, you create the law. Then it tells the executive, you implement it. Then it tells the judicialists, you have an oversight. Do this, do this, do this. That is where the power is in the constitution. The role of the leader is to recruit and mobilize energies to accomplish national vision. Then he is able to eliminate poverty. He is able to eliminate hunger. People are able to eliminate illiteracy. Because the greatest resource, the greatest energy that you can harness is in ideas. That's why human rights becomes critical, so that people can think. I'll rush to the next slide. The other slide, please. You see, once you have looked at your weaknesses and you have looked at your threats, then the next thing that you do is you look at the means. I'm sure you covered this very well on session 1. You look at the means. Once you have looked at the means, then you do prioritization. It is during this review and the analysis of your strategy that you will decide what strategic options you'll have. If it is a country that is coming out of post-conflict, then you'll have to reconstruct your security sector. And therefore, the emphasis of your education will be on reconstruction. If the means towards development, if the security sector, if you are securitizing, if you're looking at the securitization of development, then you lay emphasis on reforms. You lay emphasis on reforms. But if you are changing the attitudes and doctrines and so forth, then you will lay emphasis on transformation. In Kenya, we are laying emphasis on transformation because we have got to change people's attitudes. We have got to change people's thought process so that they start looking at security issues differently. Now, what I want to say is because of the threats, because of the nature of the threats, and because the end state today is more towards development. It's more towards securitization of development or developmentalization of security. Then the instruments of power have changed. Before I came here, I looked at the meaning of the word power, and I saw that it is derived from the Greek word dunamis, D-U-N-A-M-I-S, dunamis. Now, this word is very interesting. It touched me. You know, the English word dynamite and dynamo are derived from this word. So if you're using more of kinetic energy, you're using dynamite, because dynamite does what? It destroys. But if you are using more of dynamo, then you're using constructive power. But it has got a moral side on it also. But what was interesting is the dynamo is the concept of dynamo in constructive power and the concept of dynamite. Next slide. Yeah. Now, when I was a colonel, I used the same slide or continuum to arrive at a security strategy. The end state here is peace. You know, a country that is at peace with itself, it's at peace with its neighbors, and it is going on with its economic activities, economic well-being of the people. This is normally this will be the end state. It will be the end state. I ask myself, what is it in our own country, Kenya? What is it that is making us not be able to be at peace with ourselves? What is the main threat? What is the main threat in Kenya? And when I say Kenya, I know even you in your own country, you ask yourself. And I found the way if everybody was equal in the eyes of the law, if all Kenyans were equal, if they felt that they are equal in the eyes of the law, and if they felt that they are getting equal opportunities, they have got access to opportunities, then we would get rid of ethnicity. It will not be about the tribe. It will not be about the president comes from my tribe. It will not be this. It will not be this. But people will feel that they are equal. Therefore, I found that equity would bring national cohesion. Therefore, if food was distributed equitably, if the economy was distributed equitably, if they had political power equitably, then you would have national cohesion. Therefore, if you look at our matrix, if you look at the Kenya matrix, justice and fairness is what we need to tackle. Is what we need to tackle. And I believe if we tackle this, then we shall have peace in Kenya. Stability does not does not depict, it's a perception, but the underlying issues bring what we call is peacefulness, negative peace and all that kind of things. What we had before we had this problem in 2008, you'd think the country was not stable. It was not. This, in my opinion, is what I believe we need to do in Kenya. I would suggest that you examine your country and you fight just the way the Brazilians did, because Brazilians found that it is social security that was the problem, and therefore they formed societal security became the center of gravity. I will end with a quote. I'll end with a quote. Next slide, please. The same guy. I think I have used too much of Sun Tzu. He says that if you are a leader and you understand the war that you are fighting, and that this war is more about development, then you will guarantee security to your nation. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.